Hello, Mutts. I'm Devin Shepard.
And I'm David B. Jacobs.
And you are listening to The Cadaver Dogs, where we analyze the themes and cultural influences of your favorite scary movies. All right, last episode, we covered Wes Craven's Red Eye in part one of our post 9/11 American Anxieties genre. And you don't necessarily have to go back to listen to part one, but we highly recommend it because at the end of this episode, we will have a comparison section where we analyze the two films' common themes. And today, is the second film. And we are back, part two, with Austin Torres of the Would You Die podcast.
Hello, hello.
We were excited to talk about monsters today. I'm happy. I'm
Yes.
happy we could split this one up and spend some time to talk about good monsters, because we know that you are the king of monsters.
No, that's Godzilla.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're on the same. We're on the same wavelength. Godzilla is the king of the monsters.
Well, Austin, we talked a little bit about your filmmaking on the last episode. Everyone go listen to hear more about the films that Austin has coming out. But I was wondering, when we were talking about what we wanted to cover on this show, what attracted you specifically to these films that we're covering in this section?
There were a lot of factors into why I really gravitated towards this, because with the options I was given, there were a lot of bangers. Like there was no bad choices, so I won either way. But I gravitated towards this kind of 9/11 reaction duo of films, and I felt that that would be that'd be really good because you two were both just on my show talking about Reagan's America. So I wanted to continue our conversation trend of horror and Americana. And I want to word this very carefully.
Okay.
But 9/11 is one of the most important events in American history.
Hmm.
It might be one of our ultimate tragedies, and it changed American culture and society forever. And I
Yeah.
think we alluded to that in the first part of this series, how we were kids when this happened, and even
Yeah.
we could tell the world changed. So I think it was just continuing the Americana themes of our conversation so far. I think us being millennials and growing up with the aftermath of 9/11, that really struck a chord with me. And then you guys picked Cloverfield, and I love monster movies. So
Nice.
I hear you though. I think doing the research for these two films kind of worked a little bit as therapy of oh, I understand our generation so much more now.
Yeah, it really did.
Reliving all the literal terror that was happening.
I'm also sure that our regular listeners, have all just collectively rolled their eyes hearing that we talked about Ronald Reagan on your podcast too.
And that was a glorious episode.
It was.
I think we hit every single great 80s film and why Ronald Reagan inspired them.
Yep. Yeah, so definitely check that out, Mats. What was the episode called, Austin?
I think I called it Horror in Reagan's America.
The fun part of that show too is you always ask, would you die? Hence the name of the podcast.
That was a weird episode with that gimmick, because normally the way my show works is I always let the guest pick the topic. Normally it's Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, the Xenomorph. I ask, would you die? And the answer is yes, I would die if I met a Xenomorph. Usually it's pretty easy, but you guys didn't make it easy.
We never do. We never do.
So I think the way I kind of went about it was I asked your guys' favorite movies that we covered, and if you were able to survive them.
And I guess the listener will have to go listen to that episode to hear if we think we would survive those movies or not. That was a lot of fun. So definitely check out Austin's podcast, Would You Die? But today we are covering not an 80s film. So I'll get it started. Let's just kick it off into this conversation.
Woohoo!
It's a beautiful summer day in New York City. Two lovers, Rob and Beth, wake up next to each other, laughing and oh wait, never mind. The tape that we're watching actually got recorded over, and it looks like we're at a going away party for Rob now. Okay, so all of his friends are there. Jason, his brother, Lily, Jason's girlfriend, who is practically family at this point, HUD, Rob's self proclaimed best bro, and Marlena, who Rob has met a few times. HUD is recording the party, taking testimonials from folks when he spots Beth is there with some other guy who is not Rob. And Rob's not too happy about this. But this love triangle is going to have to wait. A rumble shakes the apartment. Fire erupts from the sky. An oil tanker capsizes in the sea. And oh my god, watch out! The Statue of Liberty's head comes flying down the street, and the city is officially under attack. Safe to say, this party is over. Looking to escape Manhattan, Rob, Jason, Lily, and HUD are crossing the broken bridge when Rob gets a voicemail. It's Beth. As he tries to make out what she's saying, a tentacle slams right on top of Jason, sending him to the depths below. Back in Manhattan now, the group tries to figure out how they are going to survive the night. But Rob has other plans for them. Beth is actually trapped in her apartment uptown, and Rob is going to try to save her. His friends are reluctant to follow, but it is in the name of love, so uptown they go. They quickly realize the streets are too dangerous to travel, as a Godzilla-sized monster is wreaking chaos on the city. And when the army attacks, it's an all-out war in Manhattan. So what other way to get uptown than to take the subway tunnels? However, that also proves no hope, as hundreds of alien-like creatures descend upon the group, biting Marlena. This bite will prove fatal, causing her to later explode. Rob, Lily, and HUD, all that is left, finally make it to Beth's apartment, half collapse as the building leans against a neighboring tower. And would you look at that, Beth is still alive. Everyone makes it to the rescue chopper alive. Lily flies off in one, and HUD, Beth, and Rob in the other. But it's not over yet. The helicopter gets taken down by the creature. The trio somehow survive, running through Central Park, and then the monster bends down and attacks HUD, killing him. Rob and Beth run into a nearby tunnel, profess their love, and then get buried beneath a pile of bricks. This is Cloverfield, directed by Matt Reeves, with a script penned by Drew fucking Goddard.
I always forget that this is Drew Goddard.
Right.
Even like in the course of preparing for this episode, I have consistently been shocked to be reminded that it's Drew Goddard who wrote the script every single time that comes up.
And then you watch it and you're like, ah, yes, this actually does feel very, Drew
It does
Goddard
make sense. I get it. Yeah, I can see that. I just forget it. So this is a found footage film, which we've covered one or two found footage movies on this pod before, and obviously it is a very strong stylistic choice. So I want to talk about that for a bit and why that choice was made, to the point where at the beginning of the movie they even clarify that this is government classified footage that we're watching. What do you guys think is the effect of clarifying that government classified footage?
I think it's like one of those things that kind of like helps engross the audience into the world of the story. I think that's something that is common in found footage movies. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't watch a lot of found footage movies. Paranormal Activity is kind of like these tapes were released by the police department or something of that nature. Like what you're seeing is blah, 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 blah. I don't remember if Blair Witch had anything like that, but I think with this being a giant monster movie with a heavy military presence,
Yeah.
I think it makes sense that this was a tape that the government obtained, and then good old Matt Reeves and Drew Goddard and J.J. Abrams leaked it to us, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree. I think like it is fitting for the story, and that's very much how I read it. There's no one else alive in Manhattan to capture this footage except for maybe the army. If you really want to dive into it, like maybe it's commenting about some secrets the government is hiding. It is classified, so we can assume that this wasn't widely seen at first and it is being leaked. I think that says a lot about like what's going on with the government and the military at the time, but I didn't really read too much into it. I think that's one way you can see it. Is that how you saw it, David, or did you have something else?
No, yeah, I'm pretty similar. In some ways it's kind of a spoiler. Like
Oh, yeah.
you see that and you know they're not getting out of there. You see they found it in the area formerly known as Central Park, and you know, one, this movie will end in Central Park, and two, there will no longer be a Central Park.
Which is why it's kind of like a twist, I guess, when HUD dies and then you see Rob pick up the video camera.
I mean, I'm very relieved at that part because I don't like HUD at all, but we'll get back to that.
The actual scariest part of the movie.
Yeah.
TJ Miller.
Ah!
Oh man.
I love how, like, no one hates someone as much as, like, I think the collective universe is, like, not a fan of TJ
Oh my
Miller.
god. Um, but,
Yeah.
like, it's more than that because it also I don't know if it creates a trust in the government. We were just talking about trust, last week a bunch, but I don't know, does this if this creates, like, a trust in the government that
Mm.
they're handling this or if it creates a distrust. I think this part leans more into a distrust that they are classifying things, they are hiding information from us. What is on this tape that we are not allowed to see? It also kind of creates a sadness as you're watching the rest of it because HUD is keeps filming everything so that there's documentation of it all, and now no one's gonna see it.
There is a sadness to that. I was thinking a lot about the character arcs and like it becomes a sad story because we see a lot of characters with like potential. Rob is going to move to Japan to start a new exciting job. Lily and Jason are like probably going to get engaged soon. It's like all of these characters have a future and like a hopeful future, except HUD. But like
Deservedly so.
deservedly so, but there's, like, this beautiful sadness in, like, he just gets handed this video camera, and then all of a sudden his life has a purpose, and, like, his purpose now is
Hmm.
to document the end of New York as we know it.
I like that. I almost wish I was more leaned into because sometimes it does feel a little forced that they're like still filming all of this, and it's like, dude, why are you doing that? And then of course it's really fitting that that's ultimately what kills him is that he goes back for the fucking video camera, and they're like, dude, what the fuck are you? And then just instantly dies.
To be fair, worth it because that shot was dope as hell.
Yes. When we do analyze found footage films, I think we hit a lot of the same questions, and one of them being, like, does this found footage work? And does it work for the themes, and does it work for this film?
As someone who does not like found footage, I think in this movie it totally works.
Whoa. Whoa, David approved. Oh my god.
I think this movie wouldn't be as memorable without that. That it gives you this first person approach into this alien attack. Like without the found footage, it's a movie we've seen many, many, many times before. But with the found footage, it is something so new and strange. It limits our perspective to the point where we don't even get a full understanding of like what's going on. And I know if you look online, there's a lot of information about the lore. I did a little bit of research into that, but not too much. We're not going to be talking too much about the lore, but I do think it's interesting that they don't explain everything in the movie
Yeah.
and what that does to it, that you're right there on the grounds with them, because if that were to actually happen, you wouldn't know what's going on. You'd be like, there's a giant fucking monster, I don't know where it came from, the military's here now, okay, I'm gonna get the fuck out of here. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm gonna go back for my girlfriend that I'm not actually dating.
We all been there.
That's a job for me. That won't get everyone killed.
So I'm also like David in the sense that I am not a huge fan of found footage because of movies like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, which are great movies. Those movies will be remembered forever. There were a lot of movies made where production companies had scripts that were never intended to be found footage. And they're like, hey, Paranormal Activity made a shit ton of money on $15,000. Make that script found footage, make us a bajillion dollars, and then a lot of them sucked because they were not designed to be that way. That being said, Cloverfield is it's definitely my favorite found footage movie.
Hey.
This was before Paranormal Activity, right?
I think around the same time because I think Paranormal
Yeah.
Activity Festival, it premiered in the festivals in 2007. This came out in
Oh,
2008 and then Paranormal Activity like had a wide release in 2009.
gotcha, gotcha, gotcha.
The average person saw Cloverfield before they saw Paranormal Activity.
And this movie was hype.
It was hyped. I'm a fan of found footage horror when it works, and for me, this works. And like, yeah, it's really interesting to look at back at that time and like see how Hollywood was like using the found footage genre as a business sense. Also looking at found footage, I mean, I feel like there's also this like collective interest in found footage around this time due to the trauma of 9/11. This isn't from the book, but I do want to recommend the book POV Horror, The Aesthetic of the Found
Ooh.
Footage Subgenre. I'll have to grab the author and it'll be in the show notes. But they point out a lot about how found footage was like how it's shot shakily through POV, like reflects a lot of traumas, specifically from our connection to it. But for me specifically, Do you guys remember around 9/11 what was being shown that whole week on the news? All the documentaries that came out, it was all, like, self-recorded videos.
Mm.
There's, like, famous videos of,
Mm.
like, the NYU students downtown in their dorm. There's all this footage from the streets of New York with, like, the clouds of smoke billowing in. Like, I remember that kind of footage playing over and over and over again, and, like, there's a documentary just about civilian footage of 9/11 that we watched in school every single year
Oh,
to
wow.
relive the trauma. Like,
This is a really interesting phenomena because I was about to say no, I was 7, but then as you were saying it, I was like, "Wait, yes, I actually do
right?
remember this." And I can recall images that I've seen throughout the years of this, and, like, I don't think there's been something like this in our nation's history since the Vietnam War, where
Mm,
in the '70s, people would come home and see, like, actual war footage from Nam on like the 6 o'clock news. Now, fast forward to 2001, and cameras are cheaper, more accessible.
yeah.
So, being in New York City, where there's what's the population like a bajillion people, a lot of whom have cameras in the early 2000s, it'd be more widespread, I think, if it happened now, where
Yeah.
everyone has a camera in their pocket. But I think that's like the beginning of the modern huge event that everyone captured kind of deal.
Yeah, which is kind of like what made it so shocking, right? So I feel like this movie definitely plays on that POV and makes us recall that time of watching a disaster from someone's camcorder on the street.
The way Cloverfield is set up, we're only following one group of characters, but there's so many stories from that one event.
Yeah.
So if they were to make Cloverfield 2, not like a 10 Cloverfield Lane or the straight to Netflix one that came out a few years,
Cloverfield Paradox.
but if they were to make a true sequel, I think it should be that exact same event told from a different point of view.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Oh man, that'd be cool. We don't even know the lore of the monster really in the film. HUD presents a million different ideas and none of them really get confirmed. He presents, did this monster come from the ocean? Is it the government experiment? Is it an alien? We kind of like get thrown all of these ideas.
Yeah, I think the internet consensus is that it came from the ocean, and the spidery things, they're parasites that live on skin. They're like sea lice essentially, but
Ew.
they're big because it's big. So
Right, because they're like different creatures all together. Yeah, because they bite
yeah.
Marlena and she gets infected.
And there's like 20 different theories about what actually happens to Marlena. When I first saw it in theaters, I thought that she had been shot. I thought that like the
Oh,
government people had killed her, but the footage does not support that. Because if you go like frame by frame, you can see she explodes from the stomach actually. Which I understand my confusion because the blood splat is on near her head, but it's her stomach that expands and explodes.
she's pregnant with parasites.
That's one theory.
Your brain in 2008 went, "It's a government cover up and the government is killing her."
Yeah.
Wow.
When that trailer just dropped and all it was like a was confusion, the Statue of Liberty had being thrown, and then the date, I feel like every moviegoer kind of like lost their mind.
Saying it that way, I hadn't put this together, but the fact that it was announced, they didn't give a title, they just gave the date of its release. We called 9/11 by the date that it happened, and it
Oh,
almost
fuck.
creates that analogy even more in that way.
Yeah, this kind of feels like it's re-traumatizing America by doing that.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, the trailer having it be, several shots of New York City being destroyed, shots from a camcorder, again, what we've been seeing on the news, and the shot of the Statue of Liberty head flying down the street, another New York landmark being destroyed. Guys, this is what, 6 years after the fact? Like, is that not too early to be re-traumatizing America?
I mean, when I came out of that theater in January 2008, my high school self was like it was horrifying, and it was my first found footage movie, so that
Yeah.
might have been part of it, but it felt real, and I think a lot of the marketing around the movie helped to lean into that by not revealing too much, by kind of just hinting at things and not really telling you what you're in for. and leaning into the conspiracy theories of it, really. That's what it really does. It leans into all conspiracy theories. Remember all the 9/11 conspiracies that people still believe?
Oh, yeah.
How can we forget? People still believe them.
Never forget. Okay. One framing device used in this film is the intercutting between the quote present day monster attacking the city and the previous day, which was what used to be on the tape before Jason and HUD recorded over it, which is Rob and Beth having a lovely day in Coney Island and very happy the day after they slept together and realized they love each other. What do you think is the purpose of doing this intercutting between tragedy and Coney Island happiness, postcoital happiness?
What's the difference?
Oh,
I think you could read it a bunch of different ways. For me personally, I think it was kind of like a chaser to the big shot of everyone we just spent the last 80 minutes following died a gruesome,
yeah.
horrible death. And I think it kind of helps to like soften that blow a little bit so it's not just pure kicking American audiences in the teeth. We're going to re traumatize you, but it won't be that bad, sort of vibes. Like pulling the punch a little bit to make it have a bit more mass appeal.
I'm glad that you said that you think it presents a sense of relief, because I actually think it's the opposite. That for
Oh
me,
no.
it hardens the blow and makes it hurt more, because it fleshes them out and makes them people. It shows that they have lives, that they were not born on the day that this happened. That they've had this entire stuff going on behind them. And there's also the in story aspect of HUD is erasing this because he's a fucking asshole who didn't make sure that the tape was blank. What a
It was
dick.
Jason. It was Jason.
But the fact that he is erasing essentially this happiness and
Yeah.
overwriting it with
Mm.
the tragedy, and like this is how they'll be remembered now. They won't be remembered as who they were. They won't be remembered as these happy people. They will be remembered for how they died.
Well, thank you for ruining Cloverfield for me.
You're welcome.
Now I see why Drew Goddard wrote for Buffy. I feel like we have to ask, should Rob have gone back for Beth? It's like the one part of the movie that makes me so angry when she's like basically dying on the phone and she's like, come back for me. And he's like, all right, I'll take me and my 3 friends. And people die in the process.
Well, Lily does get out.
Maybe.
We don't actually know for certain that Rob and Beth die. It could go
Mm.
either way. That it's possible that they've survived.
I like to think Marlena survived.
No.
I like
The
to
poor
think
girl.
that she did. It's just a flesh wound.
Because she's the hot one.
I kept getting lost in her dreamy eyes.
My God. Hud and Marlena definitely should not have gone back for Beth. That does not make any sense. You
Yeah.
don't need this many people to go for one person.
That's
Um,
true.
yeah, I'm like, what are you guys gonna do? Just go. Why are you following him? Lily, I understand because she already lost her boyfriend. She's like, okay, I'm gonna go with you and find my friend.
Right. She knows Beth.
Yeah, that makes sense. Marlena doesn't even know Rob or Beth. Like,
Oh, yeah, that's
Marlena
true.
doesn't know them. Why is there-
But no, what I was going to say was it kind of reminds me. I used to go to Michigan State University, and that is a party school. And
Yeah.
I've been on my fair share of crawls and drank my fair share of adult beverages. And there have been nights, not as high of stake, but like, oh no, so and so's still back at the house. We have to go back and get them. And
Yeah.
only one time did my entire friend group and myself get eradicated by a giant monster.
Oh. Oh.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Wait. Then how are you here right now?
Pass.
Okay.
The lore of Austin Torres.
The lore.
Also, I just want to say, Beth is loaded. She lives in Columbus fucking Circle with an apartment that faces Central fucking Park. Like, how much money do you have? What do you do for a living?
Yeah. You can read the script online, which I highly recommend. It's a great script. And there's a lot of moments that were ultimately cut from the film. I mean, again, this is a short movie, so but there's this one beautiful moment that takes place between Rob and Jason, the brothers, on the fire escape at the party before the monster comes and attacks. And it's the two of them talking about Beth and like kind of gives you a lot of backstory on that of like Rob has always had a crush on Beth and she's always been this unattainable goal. Always a person he loved, always a person that he put on a pedestal. She's really wealthy. And it kind of gives like this idea that everything that he's doing in his life, he's doing to try to win her over. Like he's going to like get a big fancy job to make a lot of money. He never felt good enough for Beth.
It also just I think it kind of plays into this idea that we were talking about last week where we were talking about, like, the safety of America pre 9/11 and how we felt very
Mm.
like nothing could really attack us, and then it happened. And I feel like that also plays into this wealth dynamic because I mean, Beth is completely loaded, but none of these characters are, like, poor. Like, none of them are impoverished. I think the big party happens down in the financial district, like, that's still a good area. These people have money, and I think there is this sort of sense of security in that. They're like, "Oh, we're in the greatest city in the world, nothing's bad's gonna ever happen to us. Our biggest problems is choosing whether to fly overseas to Japan for this amazing job, or I can stay here with this rich, beautiful girlfriend. That's the choice that I'm currently making."
Yeah.
And then they all fucking die, and it's like, "Oh, maybe something can hurt us."
I mean, off of that, like the first half hour of this movie is just a fucking teen drama, essentially. It's
Yeah,
like
even though they're in their
literally
20s.
like who slept with who. That's all these kids are worried about.
And Hud is such an asshole about it.
Yeah, he really is. He
Well
really is.
before the monster attack where people are dying, he should have turned off that camera, man. Marlene deserves better.
Definitely deserves better. I mean, she didn't really have that many options. But yeah, it presents these people with like this is the biggest thing of their life, right? The biggest thing of their life is, "Oh my god, she showed up to the party with another guy." Right? Like it's mundane life stuff and it's not until like this big attack happens that all of a sudden our lives are completely different and there's a lot of bigger things at stake here.
Yeah.
Literally bigger. It's a giant monster.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I had one more question on the list. How do you think this film portrays the military? Do you think it portrays them in a good light, in a bad light? And why do you think is the point of that?
David, do you want to go first?
It's complicated because the government classified thing, as we already discussed, presents this sort of distrust in the government. I think that presents distrust because they're covering things up. They're not going to tell you everything. But throughout the rest of the movie, when everyone is on the ground, the military are pretty helpful. Like every time they see them, they're like, "Oh, yes, come here. We have people in beds. We're doing the best we can to try to help everyone. We'll try to help you and your friends as well." Even when they're like, "Oh, I wanna go back into the fucking war zone to save this woman who is most likely already dead," the military guy is like, "Okay, I think that's really fucking stupid, but it's your choice, dude. This is where you go. This is the best route over there. If you come to this spot right afterwards, then there'll be a helicopter there and they'll take you off." It's like, "What? Okay." Just gonna let him do that. Alright.
It is weird because we expect now to, like, have the military in horror films not be portrayed greatly, especially, like, as fans of monsters, and I'm thinking of the 1999 Godzilla here, we're supposed to like the monster and not like the people that are attacking the monster. Not so in this case. I do think they are shed in a good light, and during this time, like, we shit on a lot of, like, people who are very patriotic now, but this was a very patriotic time.
It
We were
was.
very much support the troops at this time. A lot of people were losing their lives. There was already so much bloodshed on American soil that, we weren't too far into the war where we were still like, please take care of our boys over there.
I don't know how involved he is in this project, but I do know that Steven Spielberg has helped J.J. Abrams. If we're talking about like the military in Cloverfield, another horror 9/11 reaction sci-fi blockbuster is Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. And I see a lot of parallels between Cloverfield and War of the Worlds. And in that
Yeah.
film, the military is portrayed in a very, very good light,
Hmm.
which is like weird to me because Steven Spielberg, through his films, he strikes me as someone who has conflicting feelings as being anti-war, pro-military.
Oh,
Yeah.
You watch Saving Private Ryan, I think that's the
Yeah.
ultimate example of I love the troops, but war is fucking horrible.
yeah.
I think Spielberg had a quote where he said, "Every war film is an anti-war film."
So you see what I mean?
He said this in response to a Fellini quote. Editing David here, it was Truffaut, not Fellini. Where Truffaut said, "There's no such thing as an anti-war film." And then Spielberg just went, "No, no, no. Every war film is an anti-war film." And I'm just like, both of you are like kind of nuts. Okay.
But I do love that distinction between, like, yeah, war and its soldiers, because the soldiers are still just people. They are people sent to war and sometimes not by choice, which
Mhm.
does inherently make it an anti-war thing. I love that read, Austin.
And I think this point in our history, I mean, there was a lot of rising resentment toward the war in Iraq. This was
Yes.
2008. We were about to elect Barack Obama, who
Right.
Right.
famously voted against the war in Iraq when that was still an unpopular position. And then in 2008, all of a sudden, he brought that back, and everyone going, wow, this guy must be the smartest person ever. He understood that this was a bad idea when no one else knew that. But even in that respect, people were against the war in Iraq. No one was against the troops.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, War of the Worlds, I haven't seen the Spielberg one, but I have seen the 1950s one.
Banger.
And I think the fact that that story is such an old story is going to present it as a little more pro-military, that it's a little bit more fuck
Mm.
yeah, America.
Oh, the history of War of the Worlds is interesting because, like, that's a H.G. Wells book. It's over 100 years
Mm.
old, the story. And, like, it has adopted so many themes. And I don't think Spielberg's version will be the. It's not the last one. They had a BBC version of it a couple years ago, which
Oh.
I haven't seen yet. And I do think War of the Worlds is a influence on Cloverfield, whether it be the Spielberg version, which is very much a reaction to 9/11. The 1950s version, that would have been like, what, anti-communist? The Reds are coming to get us? Like, that's a
Yeah,
Probably.
1950s
yeah,
sci-fi
completely.
B movie. Yep.
Communism.
And in the book, it was like, it was an English novel, but it was anti-colonialism,
Mm.
which makes it very interesting that, an Englishman was anti-colonialism in like 1890 something.
We can also, going back to comparing us to Godzilla, because the military is
Yeah.
also very, very present in Godzilla, and in my opinion, even the Japanese military look like a bunch of idiots in that movie. Like
Mm.
the
Yeah.
whole idea of it is that the guy, the Sarazawa at the end of the movie, I don't want to spoil Godzilla in case anyone hasn't seen it, because you should really see it. It's not just what you expect. There's a lot more to it than what you think. But they make very much a point that there's the guy who has a weapon that might be able to kill off Godzilla, but he's afraid to use it because he doesn't trust the military with this weapon. He's like, I
Mm.
don't believe this will end here. And a lot of the movie's conflict is about him debating whether or not it is ethical to even fight this. So then with Cloverfield as America's Godzilla, it's interesting that we just like kind of subvert that, and now the military is totally on our side. They're useful. They actually do. They are the only ones who are successful at fighting the monster at all. J.J. Abrams says the monster is dead. I know that's not totally confirmed in the movie, so I don't know if we want to consider something that's in supplemental material. Yeah, the military is pretty helpful here.
Yeah. I love that we are comparing this film to other movies, but we do have a section now where we want to compare Cloverfield to Red Eye. Before we go there,
Now it's time for Rob's favorite part of the show, the bone review section, where we rate Cloverfield on a scale of 1 to 4 bones. I almost said Godzilla. Go- Going first is Devin Shepard.
okay. Cloverfield, there is a reason why this movie, the second I saw it, I put it on my top 10 horror films I've ever seen, and it's been on that list for years. I think the last time I saw this movie was in 2010, honestly, because I didn't want to ruin it because I knew that like the CGI probably would be bad. The found footage, I started really hating found footage over the last 10 years. I am so glad that I'm coming out of that now because rewatching this movie was a fucking blast. The CGI like somehow holds up, or they like use it so sparingly that like you can't even catch like how awful it is, or like I don't care because the creature is really cool looking. This movie is terrifying. I don't know. It's me getting older, or also now having lived in New York for so long, like this is my home, and to see it destroyed on screen is like harrowing. I think the characters, like reading the script and looking more and analyzing more of their actions, like are actually a lot deeper than we think that they are. I'm going to ignore the performances other than Lizzie Kaplan's, who was amazing. The writing was really good. I loved that it had these little moments of like relief, but they also like told so much for like the themes and the story. I love that the deaths were so shocking every single time. I just was like gasping. Like they really did get me every single time. Drew fucking Goddard, guys. I think the found footage works. This is one of like the better found footage movies, I think. And I'm going to ignore the fact about how angry I am because I believe it does play off of America's trauma a little bit, especially through the marketing campaign. But with that, I'm going to give this movie 3.5 bones. Almost four for me, almost four. Austin,
Nice.
what about you?
I still remember seeing this movie in theaters. Opening weekend, maybe opening night. I know my mom took me. I was in middle school, and I know at that point that was one of the most intense movies I've seen in the theater because I was like only in middle school at the time. And before then, the movies that I considered intense were Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds, the Will Smith I Am Legend, and Peter Jackson's King Kong. Yeah, Cloverfield was one of my first horror movies in the theater, and it's one of those influential movies that I don't get to talk about often. I'm just going to say it. 4 bones.
Fucking A. Oh shit. Do
I
I want to say
love.
four bones? Maybe I want to change mine to 4 bones. 4 bones.
Let's do it.
Yes. Inspired.
Devin, when you go first, you can't change.
Nope. No. Austin inspired me. This movie inspired him.
Oh man.
I honestly think it's one of the best horror films of the 2000s. Possibly
Yeah.
top 10.
I hadn't thought about it, but I think this might have been my first horror movie in theaters too.
Oh shit.
I mean, our regular listeners will know that I was a major chicken and did not really watch horror when I was that age. I got into horror later, but I think this was one of the first that I saw in theaters. This might have been my first in theaters of horror movies. I've had a very up and down relationship with this movie over the years. When I first saw it, it scared the living hell out of me. It felt very real. Then a few years later, I watched it again, and it might have been a low quality version, I'm not sure, but not seeing it in theaters at that time, I thought robbed it of a lot of its power. I felt like it was more predictable, more generic. I was probably getting more annoyed with the found footage aspects and the shaky cam of it. So that second time I thought, "Oh, this really didn't hold up. It's not as good anymore outside of the event." Now watching it again, this movie's fucking scary. And I think it's a weird thing where, like, when I was younger, it was scary because the found footage aspect made it feel real to someone who had not seen found footage before. Now that I'm older, it's scary because I live in New York and I understand the world more, and I'm like, oh no, this not this exactly could happen, but something like this could happen. And it's just tapping into this like existential dread of what if New York were blown the fuck up, which I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Not healthy, but that is definitely a fear that I have as someone who lives in New York, which has historically been a big target. I am going to give this 3 bones. I don't think it's perfect.
Okay.
I have issues with it, mainly HUD. HUD takes it down a lot. I really don't like him. I really don't like him. If it weren't for him, then it would be a higher rating. But I really don't like him.
I saw a letterbox review where it's like my favorite part was when the monster ate TJ Miller so he could finally shut the fuck up.
It's true though.
Oh man. So now, usually this is the part where we would end the episode. But see, we're playing with the structure, guys. So bear with us. Let us know if you like this new structure. Please tell us on places. And let's move on to our comparisons section.
Let's do it.
These two movies, Wes Craven's Red Eye and Matt Reeves' Cloverfield, one of them has a happy ending and the other does not. Why do these movies diverge? What is the effect of the happy ending versus the unhappy ending? And what does that mean they're trying to say to the American public in the wake of this tragedy?
As far as to their effect, Red Eye coming out in 2005, probably being made between 2003, 2004. That's a lot closer to the actual
Mm,
event of 9/11.
mm,
Whereas Cloverfield coming out in 2008, there is a bit more time. There is a bit more like Red Eye and War of the Worlds and I Am Legend taking place in between. So there were other
yeah.
movies that explored it. So I think Cloverfield had a bit more freedom to kind of pull its punches less. Whereas those wounds were much more fresh when Red Eye came out, including of like the filmmakers, where it's like I don't think Wes Craven wanted to make something that bleak. But I think a big reason why there's like a happy ending in Red Eye and a sad ending in Cloverfield, it has to do with the threats themselves.
Mm.
In Red Eye, it's dreamy-eyed terrorist Killian Murphy, someone we can all like acknowledge he's hot, but also he is a bad dude. And
Mm.
like we can easily root against him.
Is he like more hot than a regular hot man, though?
He's attractive. That's all that
It's
matters.
the eyes. It's the eyes. You get lost in them.
I don't know. I don't think he's hotter than Lizzie Kaplan.
Not a lot of people can say they are hotter than Lizzie Kaplan. I love her. But in
Yeah,
the case
true.
of Cloverfield, it's a giant monster, and a creature is not as easy to kind of root against. Audiences have sympathies towards the monsters as far back as like the classic universal monsters like Frankenstein and the Wolfman. I think there's an understanding that this creature is not malicious.
It's just looking for its mommy.
Yeah, yeah, I still feel bummed when Godzilla is no longer, and he is actively being a dick. So I feel even more sympathy towards Clover. I think it's a more nuanced movie, and Red Eye is there is a clear defined villain. That's why it's such a fist pumping movie.
I love that.
Giant monsters are often metaphors for a force of nature, so that makes sense because nature isn't evil; it just is.
Right.
And I think it makes a lot of sense, Austin, what you're saying is like Red Eye's coming not fresh off the tragedy, but around the time of the tragedy. And like we talked about in part one, how it really was honoring people coming together and these certain people that are coming together to fight back against the terrorists and how civilians are asked to fight this war. And it's kind of celebrating the people who, when they see something, do end up saying something. So I think that is more of like a celebration of humanity, and that's why it needs a good ending. We need to celebrate the hero. And in Cloverfield, I know I said a lot about like, ugh, it's re-traumatizing us, but at the same time, it's kind of validating the trauma that we went through. I feel
Yeah,
like we're going to start seeing this a lot with COVID. Remember at the start of COVID, we were all celebrating each other and thanking the workers and coming together as a community. And now I think we're really going to come together as a community to say, that was traumatic. We gonna be fucked up for a little bit.
yeah.
Damn, I really wish I wasn't living through major historical events right now.
Yeah, I hadn't considered how one coming later than the other might have affected that, but I think that's actually a really interesting point. Like Red Eye was a little bit closer to Spider-Man, where which we already talked about, where it's the guys on the bridge being like, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." Even though if this were in real life, they would have been saying, "You fuck with one of us, you fuck with all of us." This is what they would actually be saying, but it got to translate for the PG-13 audience. Whereas Cloverfield was the same year as The Dark Knight, where it's like,
Yeah.
what means will we go to stop this terrorist, and at what point are we just as bad as him? Is the ideas in that movie. So The Dark Knight's still a little bit more optimistic than Cloverfield is, but
Oh God. That's saying something.
I also think, though, even time period aside, I mean, you would have to do a much deeper analysis of all the 9/11 influenced movies and how many were optimistic and how many were pessimistic, and like put them on a timeline in order to see if that is actually a trend, which I anecdotally sounds accurate, but I don't know the statistics on that.
You don't have a job. Come on, David, make the list. Let's do it. Part
Well,
3.
I wasn't prepared for that argument, Devin. I didn't know that was gonna be a question.
I say that with a lot of love. That might have come off as really mean as what I'm seeing Austin laughing at right now.
Oh, fuck.
I'm trying to finish the sound on wild
D
animals, okay?
David just made an amazing movie. It was not a shot against David. Also, the film industry sucks.
I also think there is a point to be made
Oh
that
my
the
god.
happy endings and unhappy endings, I think both deserve to be seen. That for me, the happy ending is escapism. It's a catharsis in the idea that if I were on that plane, I could have stopped that terrorist. I
Mm.
could have been the hero. I could have saved everyone. And it's kind of just this power fantasy of standing up to the evil and stopping it. Whereas with Cloverfield, with it being like so miserable and so depressing and tragic, it's like you were saying, Devin, where it is a validation that, like, no, it's okay that you are upset about this. But also, in that this time, now you are witnessing the trauma again, but you actually do have power over it now as the viewer. You chose to walk into this theater. You are choosing to continue to sit in the theater, and you know that at some point the movie will be over.
Yeah, in that way, yes, and I feel like that fits to a lot of reasons why, like, people say they like to watch horror movies. There's an expectancy of they know what they're in for, and they know that it's gonna be over at a certain point, and they're allowed to feel anxiety and fear, but know that they won't have to by the end of the movie.
During COVID, there was that statistic that people who watch horror movies were handling the stress of COVID better.
Yeah.
And then all those normal plebes were like, that makes no sense. Why would that happen? What is this about? This must be exaggerated. And then all of us like sane horror fans were just like, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I remember that. That was funny. I get what you're saying, David. There's a control over what we're watching in Cloverfield because we chose to like experience the trauma that we're seeing on the screen. It's almost interesting to me though than to look at the POV in Cloverfield, which is through HUD's camera, and I feel like HUD is not really involved with the scenes or the action. He is kind of like this omnipresence throughout the film. So when you say that like we're experiencing it at the same time because we're experiencing it through HUD's POV, it's almost like we're not. Does that make sense at all?
I disagree with that. I think HUD is very much there and present. His response to trauma is kind of to make jokes. Like, that is a common trauma response. Yeah, in case our listeners haven't noticed, we often make jokes while in the middle of discussing very serious topics on this podcast.
Yeah, we're
I
just laughing our way through
9/11.
very dark
Yeah.
things.
Not me. I just keep thinking of
Killian Murphy's
dreamy
eyes.
Killian Murphy's eyes. Yeah. And Lizzie Kaplan.
And there's also, I think we kind of he is in a bit of shell shock, and he is in a bit of I'm just gonna keep doing what I was doing mode. Like I almost feel like he hasn't fully absorbed what's happening, but he is very much aware of it. Like, it is a very realistic response, I think, to this kind of trauma. And then
Yeah.
maybe the best line in the movie is when they're in the subway before they start going to the tunnels, and they're all just kind of having this downtime to connect. And then he goes up to Marlena and he says, I feel like I should say something, but I don't know what to say.
Mm.
That's a great line. That was a great moment.
And it's like, oh no, there is a person in there. He's like he's trying to figure out, he doesn't know what's appropriate to say in this moment.
Yeah.
That's why so much of him can come off as comedic relief or just babbling, because he's just trying to latch on to something.
But at the same time, he doesn't save the day, comparing to Red Eye, where like our protagonist is Rachel
Yes.
McAdams, Lisa Reiser, and we're with her the whole time, and she does save the day. There are multiple times throughout Cloverfield where, and I'm thinking of one scene actually in particular after Marlena is bitten and she's trying to put gauze on her back or whatever she has and hold it against the wound to stop the bleeding, and HUD's there with the camera. He doesn't reach out. He's like asking her if she's okay. He's asking her how she's feeling. Like he's talking to her, but we don't actually see him like help. She looks like she's struggling with like trying to cover up this bite and to cover up the bleeding, and he doesn't help. And it's like we are through his POV and it kind of feels like our POV, and it is like this really intense moment of helplessness as a viewer where you're like, oh my God, so much has happened and I can't do anything. But he's sitting right there and he's not doing anything. That was a lot. Whereas, like, the cathartic emotion that I got through Lisa kicking ass with a fucking field hockey stick was incredible. Like, I loved that moment compared to HUD, who's acting as our proxy, not doing anything to save Marlena.
It's the power of fantasy versus wallowing in the helplessness.
I'm gonna say something. It's gonna sound weird. Cloverfield is a more realistic movie than Red Eye.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I think Red Eye is a power fantasy, wish fulfillment type of movie that I think a lot of people needed at that time. Rachel McAdams, Lisa, is like, she's not a final girl, but she's final girl coded.
Mhm.
Mm.
Whereas the characters in Cloverfield are just normal fucking people. And normal fucking people don't always do the right thing. They freeze.
Yeah.
They have never seen a giant kaiju in New York City before.
What we're kind of beating around, what all of this kind of ties into, is this idea that Lisa has a lot of agency. She's very proactive in her film, whereas the cast of Cloverfield are basically completely helpless. And I feel like this also kind of ties into idea of like, do we have control? Like on 9/11, when we were all watching that footage, like that was this feeling of just us being stripped away of our control. And what does that do to us? What do we do if we don't have that?
I
Wow.
don't Yeah. Watch horror movies?
Yeah, watch horror movie. Yeah, life doesn't give you many choices. There's always the illusion of choice and free will, but at the end of the day, your only choice is like, this thing happened, how do you react to it? And in Cloverfield it's a lot harder because it's a giant fucking monster. There's no precedent for that. Everyone's scared, everyone's panicked, but in like Red Eye, Lisa is presented with the choices and she decides to act. And in part 1, we talked a lot about United 93, and that is real life. People acted. People were
Yeah.
presented with a situation and they acted. I just feel like in life we have little agency. We can't control very much, but we
Yeah.
can control how we respond to situations.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. I think yes. Were there any final points that either of you wanted to say about both of these films or 9/11?
I grew up on Long Island and both my parents worked in Manhattan. My dad worked in the financial district and was a few blocks away when it all happened.
Oh, shit.
So, yeah, that was weird. At my elementary school, they didn't tell us what had happened.
They didn't tell you?
No, my school decided that the best thing to do would be to continue about the day. And it wasn't until I went home and my sister was in a different school. She was in the middle school at that point. So she was already back and she was watching the news. And I was like, why are you watching the news? Are you an adult now? What? And that was when I found out.
Wow, talk about action versus, like, hiding away. Like, that's crazy. This happened when I was living in California, and I remember this day so fucking clearly, but I definitely remember waking up and seeing it immediately, going over to my friend's house. I was picking her up to walk over to
Oh yeah, because it's a
school.
different time zone.
Yeah, it's a different time zone, but it was already happening by the time we were awake, so maybe that would be a difference, but yeah, her parents said something, and then the second we got to school, we just sat in a circle and talked about our feelings all day and talked about what was going on, and, like, the whole day was centered around this thing. The whole week was centered around this thing.
Yeah.
I think I blocked a lot of it out of my memory. I don't remember it
Yeah.
very well.
Well, it's September, so, as much as we talk about America and our issues with it on this podcast, this was the way that we wanted to honor 9/11 and our history. So thanks, Austin. Thank you for chatting through this heavy subject with us and going down memory lane and the traumatic memory lane that it was.
Thank you for having me. I love being on your show. I love having you on my show. I can't wait for the next collab. I'm assuming it will be very Americana as well.
We'll continue the series.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is always a great conversation. We're so happy to have you back. If you want, we had a mini-sode with Austin, so go check that out. And then, of course, we were on Austin's show, Would You Die? So go check that out, as well as other awesome guests on Would You Die podcast. Can you please let the people know where to find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WouldYouDieShow. I have a YouTube channel where I post video versions of my podcast. You can also find my short films Best Day Ever and Ice Cream on there. Right now my short film Spider is going through the festival circuit. It just got accepted to Spooky Empire in Orlando, Florida in October, and sometime in 2025 Spider will be on the Would You Die YouTube channel. I'm working on more horror content to post on that, so I'm slowly gradually building up that YouTube platform, and I do have a Patreon. So if you guys like my voice and want me to do more horror stuff, you can support me for $3 a month, and I post movie reviews, extended episodes, behind the scenes stuff, just extra stuff I'm able to, and that goes a long way to helping me get out of my corporate soul-sucking day job and helping me do fun, passionate horror stuff full time.
Yay, we always wanna support that. So we'll post all those links, all of Austin's links in the show notes, so go ahead and check it out there. And then, of course, you can find us, Cadaver Dogs Pod, on Instagram and Twitter. We are also on TikTok at Cadaver Dogs Podcast. And Austin is a friend of the pod that, we've met through social media and, like, really gotten to know and love having on. We're always looking for more collaborators. So if you have a podcast or if you wanna come on our show, please feel free to reach out. You can hit us up on social at the ones that I said, or you can email us at cadaverdogspodcast@gmail.com. All right. Thank you again, Austin. It was a pleasure having you. See you, Mutts.
Peace. Wait, you know who Superman is?